Alright, today we're going to go over a request from Ray where he wanted to know how I got such vivid colors without oversaturating and clean without a bunch of graininess and stuff. And this is kind of going to show that, but this is also going to show basic HDR, what HDR is and what HDR isn't. There's a lot of people I see that are using little iPhone apps. I'm thinking they're doing HDR because it adds some grit and grain, and that's not HDR, that's just a filter that's doing it. Now there are some people that are using like Camera Plus where they're actually partially doing, I guess, what you would call an HDR, and they, it looks okay on the phone. But if you wanted to, let's say, put it on the wall or something, put it on your computer, it's going to look like crap. And it's not real HDR, and the phones really don't have enough power yet to do an HDR. I mean, this is running on an absolutely loaded MacBook Pro with 3 processor jumps. It's not the newest one, it's the one right before this last one, but it's got everything. And this thing will strain sometimes when I'm doing HDR. So, a phone or a tablet or something really just doesn't have the power yet to do it. I'm sure it will pretty soon, but so we're going to go over first kind of what HDR actually is. HDR is high dynamic range. And what high dynamic range is basically being able to see the photo that you're looking at like our eyes are viewing it in the real world. And because our eyes see much, much better than a camera does. Cameras just don't have the technology yet to see like our eyes do. And where that really gets messy is especially in shadows and highlights. And just in the interim, we can kind of pick some stuff out, or we can pick all that out, but the cameras can't. And they're getting better. The dynamic range is getting to be just so much better, except for Canon, which I have no idea why Canon is not doing anything with their dynamic range. It just absolutely blows my mind. We're actually to a point on some of these sensors where you don't actually even have to do HDR anymore if you don't want to do the artistic ones. If you just want to do the actual real high definition range, which I'm going to show you here how that's kind of done, where you don't need multiple images anymore. So hopefully Canon gets off their ass and does something with their dynamic range, but it doesn't look like they're going to. And I'll actually show you kind of an example in here on where that makes a difference. Even though you are combining all these different ones, windy, just kidding, there is a substantial difference in actually the tone of the image and how it comes out. So I think that it is a pretty big deal in the end. And pretty much everyone else, Nikon's doing it, has big dynamic range, Fuji, Sony, all the other people have, our 14 stops or better in dynamic range, and Canon's still lagging around 11, 12. And again, I'll show you that when we get there. It's not a big deal, but if it is a big deal if you just want to do one photo and make a high dynamic range out of it without doing the fake version of it, then it does make a difference. So you can follow along, Canon users. If you're going to do the single ones, you're probably going to want to do 2 of them, one for more towards the highlights and one more towards the shadows. Everyone else, or with the older cameras, you might want to do the same thing. The newer cameras, you probably won't have to, and you can follow this fine. And this is really, really easy to what we're going to do. So really the first thing that we're going to do is take a picture. And this is a set from an HDR set from, it looks like August the 12th of this last year. And this is actually, I got 6 of them, 6-shot HDR. So it starts dark, and then gradually, what you do is you start dark, and you're taking the shots, and you move it up. But you do it a certain way so it doesn't, you don't always has a constant aperture and whatnot. You change the shutter speed, or you use bracketing on your camera. I actually find that if you do it manually and move the dials yourself, it does a much better job for some reason. But you also move the camera when you do that, so it's a trade-off. And up to real light. And I have these set on my D70 where I have 2 presets, and I just blast them off bracketed. Or I'm going back to my old way after looking at my old D90 pictures, because they're just so much better the way I was doing it back then. But that's how these ones were done, so that's what I'm going to go for. So generally speaking, one of the photos is going to be your average photo, which would be like the one you would just take if you were taking one. In this particular case, it would be this one. So as you can see up here, in the trees, it just gets dark. You lose detail. You can't tell what's over here. Inside these bushes, you can kind of see, but it's dark. You start losing detail, like underneath the trailer. When you zoom in here, you can kind of see some of this stuff, but from afar you can't. But from this shot, you start seeing, you're having a hard time seeing what's kind of in the trees and stuff. And where's a better example? Take like these trees down here. You have these just kind of holes in the trees where they go in, and you can't see what's, the leaves and stuff inside. One there, just generally all over. Down here by the barn, you can't, it just kind of goes black. And when I took these, it was really overcast and raining and a big storm. Obviously, it was coming and going. I don't remember if it came or just went. So if you do take pictures in the rain or right after rain or when there's a lot of moisture in the air, you get way better colors. Now, when I'm using actual camera raw images, which you can tell here by the NEF, on Nikon is NEF, Canon is .cr2, Sony is ARW, and I don't know what Fuji is. When you take a pictures with the Canon RAW, or not Canon RAW, but the camera RAW, it's not adding anything to it. It's not processing the image like it would a JPEG, so it's just an actual flat picture. So you don't have, hugely, if this was a JPEG, this would be much more saturated. It'd be sharpened. Canon RAW files actually come out sharpened a bit. For whatever reason, the Nikons are a little softer. They don't have any sharpening now that you kind of do everything. And by the way, if you're just taking raw photos and you're seeing on the back of your viewfinder and you're looking at the picture and it looks great, and then you open up your raw and it doesn't look like that at all, that's because inside the raw file there's actually JPEGs, and that's what you're seeing on the screen. You're not seeing the actual raw file, and I know that screws a lot of people up, but I'm probably going to do something on that as well. But generally speaking, the raw files are going to be a little bit flatter in color. So yeah, anyway, so the other thing I was getting to is like the other thing, like, our eyes can see down like into the barn here, and where here you can't in the normal picture. Again, it's just, kind of dark in here. There's not, can't see tons of detail. As pertaining to stuff like this, where you want to see details in the trees, the next shot, you're going to start seeing a little bit more. And you can kind of see a little bit more in there too. And then the next shot, if we're blown out, okay, now you're seeing detail tucked way back in there. You can see all that detail, and it's nice and curly, and you can see in there, you can see down there, you can see the tree better. You can see in here in these leaves and whatnot. And you see down in this corner much better, and that's, kind of how our eyes are going to see it too. But the whole thing itself is, as you can see up here, and your histogram is really kind of blown out. And then on the other side of the spectrum, as it gets darker, it's not really how you see it. So anyway, what HDR basically does then is it combines all those together so that it gets it closer to how our eyes view it. Like I said, it's not an app on a phone. You can run your little dynamic HDR app, and it just puts a bunch of grain across there and sharpens it a lot and adds some saturation. If you really want to do HDR, you got to kind of do it the manual way and kind of learn what it actually is. Most people, I don't think, have any idea of what it actually is. They just think it's a grungy look, and it's really not. It can be realistic. It can be grungy and artistic. Most people just make it really grungy and artistic. They don't do any cleanup on it. They don't clean up any of the grain or noise that comes out of it. And HDR makes a lot of noise. And I see that on a lot of people on these things. They just run it through and they don't put it into Photoshop and actually fix it like they should, or they use really, really bold, obnoxious colors that are actually kind of not harmful to your eyes, but they irritate your eyes, like real strong yellows, real strong reds, oranges. Back from my designing website days, one of the things we learned is, pastel colors are much better because they're cool on your eyes and they let people go through your site without getting irritated. But the same with these photos. You look at some of these photos, they're kind of cool, but when they're doing the same ones over and over and it's real harsh colors, you can't look at them for very long. And those people are going to have a hard time unless they change. So maybe they'll see this and they'll do it. Maybe they won't. So anyway, here there's a couple of HDRs. I'm going to do one. And in a second, I'll show you different looks. But this is just kind of the preset that it was on at the time that it came out. So you can kind of tell that was the normal one. That was this one. And since it was really wet in the air, you're going to get really saturated colors. Which is one of the secrets to getting saturated colors is shooting the rain. That's why you should get a weatherproof camera, for one, or get something to cover it. But that is my favorite time to shoot, absolutely, is in the rain. So now as you go in and look on this file, now look at all the great detail that we have in the trees. I mean, you can actually see, and it looks 3D, and you can see in here, I mean, there's some noise that needs to be cleaned up, and that's where you got to take it into Photoshop kind of and do it. Again, compared to that's how the camera takes it, and then that's your HDR version. And we can take this, the colors on this way down and just run it like a regular photo, but we can actually go in there and pull these textures and everything out without screwing the photo up too. So I've had the conversation with people where they think the HDR is just over the top and whatnot. You can make it just like this file, but you have the ability to pull stuff out of it, in which most people just don't understand that fact for whatever reason, and that's probably the greatest thing about it. All right, so first what we're going to do is a lot of times what I'll do when I'm doing HDR is I won't do anything to the photos other than maybe do a lens correction, add some denoise because HDRs will get real noisy, especially in the shadows, and just run it straight through the HDR merge. But since I do want to show how to do one image for Ray and how to get good vibrant colors, or for a lot of people that don't do HDR or that just shoot in JPEG but need to start shooting in RAW, kind of show you my little trick to going through an image in Lightroom that makes it super quick, super easy, and it works almost every time. Except I'm adding a couple little things to it, but the general process, I will demystify Lightroom for you in like 2 minutes. And something that took me like 2 years to figure out, and I'll help you do that in like 2 minutes. So what we're going to do is start on these. Now, one of the benefits of the raw files, if you don't know, is one is it packs a whole lot more information in detail than a JPEG does. Two, it's lossless, so you can save it and start over and save it, and it's not going to lose any tones. You can always go back to the original one without having to keep an original on file. It's just way better than JPEG all around. And one of the, like I said, one of the big things is you can restart it at any time and start back up with it, which I'll show you how to do that here in a second, which actually you have a reset button right here. Plus you got a lot more that you can do when you let the camera produce a JPEG for you. It, whatever you have the camera setting at, portrait, landscape, vivid, it makes the decisions on how that image is going to come out. You can control some saturation, the contrast, and whatever, but it's not as fine-tuned as you can in Lightroom or Photoshop. So, these purists that say, oh, it has to come off the camera like that, personally, I think they're idiots, because if you want to add saturation and contrast and sharpness, and you think it's better coming off the camera that way than what you could do in an editing program, then you're just stupid, because that's not, you just don't have that kind of control on camera like you do in these ones. So, you know, I could totally jack this up to all kinds of, you know, whatever, and if I decide I want to restart back over, I can just hit reset. I'm back to where I was at. And it actually keeps it in a little database, is how it works, so it always goes back to the same. And another thing you can do, like you'll see on here when I'm going over this, it says like 1 of 2. Those are just copies that I have. You can actually make a copy of each individual files. Like I hardly ever use the original, just I don't know why, but I'll just come on one, and then what I'll do is I'll just go up here and hit create virtual copy. It's not actually making another copy, it's just making a file with the numbers pertaining to how this one is set, but it's not physically an actual another file. You can export it as a JPEG or TIFF or whatever, but it's not an actual other file. And that's what I've done on here. I'm not going to show you this one yet because I'm saving this. I just went through this, so just in case I screw this one up, because it's 2:30 in the morning and God knows what I'll do. Alright, so what I'm going to do is we're going to pretend this is just my I only took one photo, and I want to get the maximum picture out of it range that I can get to start with to take to Photoshop. On this particular one, since we have a lot of detail stuff, I do have here's something I didn't even talk about. This is Lightroom, and this is which I basically use to catalog and do basic adjustments to my raw files I pull out of the camera. And then I do most of the work in Photoshop. But I do stuff in here, and you can have presets. Like you can see this little box up here, which I'll make a little bit bigger. You know, and you go over, you know, real quick ways to make stuff look a whole lot different. You know, if you want to make it, you know, different tones, I mean, it's real easy, and you can save stuff that you make that you like, or you can buy presets. I buy a lot of presets. You see how I mean, it just drastically changes everything with the click, which is nice, which is much nicer than Photoshop's actions, because people that make the actions screw them up, and every version it seems to something doesn't work right. So there is one in here that I'll use, especially on HDRs a lot, which is Matt Kloskowski's tonal contrast. Even though they just sold out, went to the other side, he still makes a couple of presets. And all this one does is basically gonna take some contrast out and add some clarity to it. Before I do that, one other thing I do want to show you. When you're in here, like I said, when you do take a picture in camera raw on your camera, it ignores everything on your camera. So one trick I have to see if things are sharp is, if I'm not making JPEGs as well, I'll turn the sharpening all the way up so I can see real quickly if I'm really in focus or not. It won't actually put that into the raw file as being sharp. The raw file just collects whatever the sensor sees. But when you come in here to Lightroom, you have the ability to use any of the presets. So say you wanted to use the landscape preset, and you didn't, or you forgot, or you know, maybe a lot of times you can shoot raw and JPEG, and you forgot that it was on portrait, and you really want a landscape or vivid. Well, you can come in here under camera calibrations and actually pick. These ones are actually Nikon ones. They have Canon ones, whatever, but they're basically set the same as your camera. So say I wanted, you know, landscape, I can click it, and then that is exactly how it would come out, be produced from the camera in landscape. Well, not exactly, but close. Portrait, the same. I usually just leave it in standard. When you have these, there's different versions too, and every version has different controls, and they make things look way different on a lot of stuff that you do. I don't really have anything on there yet, so you can't tell, but a lot of the control stuff, it'll make stuff all jacked up. So I would just always use the newest one. Alright, so back to what we're doing. So the first thing I want to do on my particular one is I'm going to hit the total contrast and move this back over. And but all that really did on here was it dropped the contrast down a little bit. It did a little bit with highlights and shadows, which we're going to ignore, and it boosted the clarity up a little bit. And that's pretty much all it did. So you can actually do that on your own. It's just nice to have a preset over here. And anything you can do, you can save your own preset to make it real quick, so you don't have to go through all this. But if you are going to use a preset and then do stuff over here, unless you have a system that specifically has pieces going together, do the preset first, because if you do stuff over here, a lot of these presets, when you hit it, will change settings over here and screw everything that you just did up. So in that particular case, I did that first, and then I'm going to come over here. And first thing I'm going to do is look at my histogram up here, and it needs a little bit in the highlights. We're missing out just a little bit. So one trick that you can do, and a lot of people don't actually know this, but normally what I would do when I come here, and I'm going to go back and do it in a second, too, is you're going to use either your exposure and your contrast and some of these to correct this. You can actually see these different bars going across. You can click in the different ones and just drag these over to help with your exposure, and these are a little too far. And then if you hold down on your keyboard your Alt or Option key and you do it, you can, like, I'm going to come way in. See, there's no good black in there now, and as I start coming over and you start seeing stuff on the screen, there's my blacks. And you can also see up here, it'll tell you if you're getting there or not. And then you can do the same on the other side too. And once you start seeing those little white specks coming in, you see some right at the top, then you're okay there. But see, now this one says blue up there. And when it says blue, basically what that means is you're blowing something out. And it should highlight, and up here it's just, you can't really see, but it's barely flicking. It's not going to make any difference. I'm still going to bring it back a little bit on there. So if you're blowing stuff out, it just depends on where it's at. If it's on the shadows and you're doing it on a post or something, you can't see the detail, who cares? Same with the sky. If it's blown out completely, then you can't, there's no detail, then it doesn't really matter. But like up here, you can see in the sky, there's subtle detail in the clouds and stuff, and you want to keep that, so you don't want to blow that out. Alright, the next one that comes down is your white balance. Again, most people used to set this in camera raw, or in their cameras, where if you're inside, you want to switch it for the light so it doesn't come out orange. Daylight and cloudy, they all have different settings of what they use. In camera raw, you basically just leave it. If you want to see what each one does, you can kind of go through them and see how it would be. And this is just like it would be in camera, or use auto and see what auto comes up with. Go back to S-shot, or you can move the sliders around to get wherever you want between that and the tint. Again, you can always go back, or they have this little tool. If you click on this, you basically move around until you get, see, like that one has, they're all pretty close numbers. Like if you get everything in the 70s straight across, you're looking for neutral colors, especially neutral gray, but the best way is to get all of those in the 60s. Even though the 70s will work, you really want to kind of get it into the 60s or close. So that's kind of close enough, and that would basically, when I click on this, it should give me what the actual white balance was. So you can kind of see it, and it is a little bit different than what I had. I actually like what I had because it's adding, the one I had was a little bit cooler. This is warmer, so it had some blues up in the sky. So I'm going to go back to S-shot. So now I got those blues back. I just kind of like that color better. I'm not going to mess with these really yet at this point. Now, here's the real trick I do on doing any photo that I do, is immediately when I get to these, is I take the highlights, I go all the way down. because what that does is make sure none of the highlights are blown out in the sky. So remember, it was up here. You can see how there's a lot of white in the sky. It's probably blown out. Now you can see where all the detail would be. But I know you're thinking it looks kind of dark. Well, and this is the best part. You take shadows and you move them up. So here's the cool thing about that. And this is where having some of these newer cameras that have the bigger dynamic ranges in them. Sorry, Canon, I'm not talking about you. Where they have problems. But the newer ones are great because you can really open them up. So for example, if this was a Canon and we're talking about the shadows, you could open it up to about here. So from where you would start here, you can be able to open it up, somewhere around in here. And then all the ones that have real dynamic ranges now, you can open up even farther. So in contrast, if you look at it and see, just concentrate looking right down here in the barn. And this is how it was originally. And then when you open that shadows up, well, you can see all that detail in there, plus all the detail in the trees and stuff. So that's why you switch these around. And then for the whites and blacks, a trick is going to be to hold your Option or Alt key down, and then click on that Start on the whites, and it's going to go black. So what you want to do is just go till you start to get the smallest little bit of whites in. In this case, I have to go to the right because I don't see any. You'll see them pop up. See how they'll start popping up different colors, and they'll start with those little blue dots right there. You want to go till you just get those dots, okay, and let it up. That way there's nothing clipping or anything that says it's pretty close, but it's not. Then you do the same thing with the black. And again, hold down your Alt or Option key, hit your blacks, but go to the left. The difference is on the shadows or on the blacks, I don't want to just stop when I see a little bit coming in. I want to make sure I got some real black in there in those shadows. And then do it up. So that way I have a good black starting point, which is pretty novel. So you can see already that we've come a long ways on just a simple image. And really that only takes about 3 seconds to do. If, I wasn't here blabbermouthing. The clarity is up already from what I had before, that preset I used, but if you want things to be softer, you can go down. If you want things to be sharper, you can really go up. Now if you're doing HDR, you don't want to go too much because you're going to be putting this on all of the other files, so you want to be pretty conservative. But as you can tell, it does sharpen stuff up without really sharpening, because I think the sharpening in Lightroom absolutely sucks. So I don't really do any real sharpening in Lightroom. Alright, so once I do that, I'm going to take the vibrant and crank it up just a little bit, maybe like to 10. Saturation, I'm not going to touch on this one. I'm not going to mess with the tone curves. Most of these colors look fine. If you're doing it just one image, you can mess around with these a little bit more to make them how you want. If you wanted the sky a little bit bluer, whatever, you can do that. Or you have stuff up here too if you want to do a gradient coming down, so it looks more natural. You can do that, but since I'm going for the HDR, I'm not going to do any of that because the HDR will take care of that for me. Split toning, I don't really mess with. The sharpening, like I said, I really don't like the sharpening on here, and I'll show you why. If you come into like the side, and a lot of these are going to have pretty big radiuses and no masking, and the sharpening is going to get real high. It's kind of hard to see on that. Maybe we go somewhere you can kind of see it. I don't know if it's going to come out in the video or not, but what it does is it distorts it to a really weird way, and it doesn't look natural at all on here. When it's small like this, I mean, obviously it makes it look better. Like even if you look at the fence down here, it makes it look much better. But when you print it, it looks like crap. So I really don't do any sharpening in here. I will do the next one down, which is some noise reduction. And actually I have some presets for that. This one, there's not particularly really any noise. And one of the places you're going to find noise is in the shadows. Even though I took these at ISO 100, so they shouldn't be noisy at all. But when you combine HDRs, they create noise. They're just brilliant about that. So I'm going to just add light noise. When you get into some of these darker ones, sometimes you got to really crank it up a little bit on each one, or process these separately and do noise reduction on each one just to get all that noise out before you merge them. Alright, so that should be fine. Alright, the next one down, remove chromatic aberrations. Again, this is something I just hate on Canons. And you can kind of see on here, I got a little bit of pink ones here going around, and some on the fence. And I thought this was a lot until I did that 5D files, and they were just horrid. And it turns out to be that the Canons just don't have in-camera reduction for it like Nikon does. Nikon has actually pretty good ones, as it turns out. So it's not as bad, but there still is some. And these will happen in high contrast areas. So when you got dark meeting light is when those will happen. So you have a tool here to fix that. You just click on it, boom. And you see, if you watch right there, you see that pink, red, and it's gone. You see down there with some on the fence too, and it's gone. I don't even have to move these sliders around on this particular one to do it. Yay. Alright, and then the next one on here is I'm going to go to the profile, and this is a big wide angle lens, so everything's kind of, like this tree is tilted inward, and it should be going outward, and that's just part of having wide angle. So there's actually presets that you can put in here to fix that, so I'm going to click that. It's automatically going to find my lens, which is a Tokina. It's from a D90, but it's close enough. And again, if you see what it does, it stretches it back out to how it's supposed to be. The only problem with it is, like, if you see down here, it will cut some of the edges off. But it's straight. Alright, so after that, really, that's it. That's all I need to do on it. So, and you see, I mean, you could really be done with the image at that point if you really wanted, but since, if it was me, I would take it into Photoshop to finish it off. And in this case, since we're doing HDR, we're not quite done yet, even though, I mean, most of the stuff looks really good. And you see how Paco was looking at me all the way down there. But everything seems okay. It was kind of windy, so the HDR could screw up some of the trees and stuff, but all the stuff can be fixable in Photoshop. So I have 6 of these images that I got to do, and so instead of going through this 6 times, what you can do is there's a keyboard shortcut, but I'm going to do this one, where you just go into Develop Settings, hit Copy, pick what you want out of here, which is usually most all of them, just hit Copy, and then you want to just click on all the rest of the other 6. Just right click on any of them, hit Develop Settings again, hit Paste Settings, and you can kind of watch them down here. The thumbnails will update, and they all change, so now they all have the same basic settings that you have on the one that you did, and they're still highlighted. So at this point, there's really 3 things you can do. You can merge them in Photoshop, which actually does a pretty good job merging them. You can do it in HDR Pro, or you can do it in Photomatics. HDR Pro always looks really good on here, but compared to Photomatics, but I always pick Photomatics, as is most people. It just does a better job in the end, even though it doesn't look good on the screen. When you're making it, when you compare them at the end, it does. So I'm going to go in here and I have all 6 of them. Highlight them, go to Photomatics Pro, and make sure everything on here is right. It's on a tripod. I am going to show options to remove the ghosts because some of these trees will be moving. So I want to be able to do that. I don't want it to, you can do it to reduce noise, but it doesn't do a real good job. I already set this over here to reduce the chromatic aberration, so I don't need to do that. You can if you want, doesn't really matter. And how you want to put output as 16-bit TIFF is how you really want to do it. I'm just hit export. Supposedly though, if you actually at this point were to export these as JPEGs and then run them through the HDR, you'd get better results. I think it's too close to really call, so I don't worry about it, because right now what it's doing is it's converting them into TIFFs. And TIFFs get to be really big files, but it's going to convert the TIFFs and then open them up in the Photomatix program. Someday. I'm almost out of room, so it's making it go slower. Alright, so it's picking this shot to be the base image. As we kind of go around to see how everything's lined up. Kind of alright, but since I know stuff's blowing around, I'm going to take the deghosting and crank it. With Photomatix, what you can also do instead is do selective ghosting. So let's say there's a person walking or something in there, you could actually do selective deghosting and just go excuse me, around it and then pick from which photo that you want it from, and it'll put it in there. So if you pick one that's far enough away, you'll see when you hit preview, see it makes it all goofy around it. So you kind of have to watch out and make sure you get one that's close enough to it, and it's usually the darker ones that work better because they're the ones that are have a faster shutter speed, so they're gonna have less movement. So if I use one of those, it looks better, but it still doesn't quite match, so I'll probably go to the next one down, but that is one way you can do it. I'm going to get rid of that. I'll go back to automatic, and just turn it all the way up. Hit OK. And then really this should answer your second part about how you get the colors boosted without overdoing it. And you can kind of see, I mean, we haven't done anything in Photoshop yet. And it's just, you get all the colors, and it's a little more pronounced on this particular one because of the conditions. Like, so it's raining, you get really saturated colors. And you can do some editing within here, but these are basically the 6 merged together. You can have presets you can do with them that go, anywhere, all different colors, temperatures, blah blah. I see a lot of the people on there that basically use the ones that they come with, which are built-in ones, especially one called, well, that right there is one I use a lot of the times, which is just, there's nothing really done to it. This is just the mix of them and just balanced a little bit, so it's more like a regular photo instead of the artistic-y one. They call it balanced, which it's usually too dark for me. Photographic, that's still too dark for me. Natural, again, that's one sometimes I'll use because that's more like a regular photo and not an HDR. But the one everyone uses is like Painterly, and it's hard to see on this particular one, but I can tell the people on these little sharing sites that use these, and where it kind of pushes where HDRs get a bad name. It's hard to tell. Like this one, you can't really almost screw up. So, but some of the ones that people do when you're real close in on stuff, you can definitely tell. Now, you can go back and use, like I said, you can do, there's different kinds of processing on the HDR. Like this is more supposed to be realistic. That's actually for inside. If I had to do, those are ones I made for that test, which are actually kind of like that one. And up here, exposure fusion is more going to be to make it look just like a regular photo, and you can edit from that way. I have it set for real estate because I was doing inside shots. There's Fusion Natural. They give you different ones to make it so it's not so HDR-ish in the bad way. Tone mapping is where it really you get that real HDR look. And since that's where we were headed anyway with HDR, I have a zillion presets, but I usually do the same thing. I just go to defaults and either take that if it looks good and open that. I mean, I can take that straight. Once I save this, open it straight into Photoshop and go. And that's just like a regular photo. But I'll usually crank this up a little bit. Sometimes the lighting, depending on where stuff's at, it just moves the lighting around. So like that's making all the foreground darker. You know, if you really want to highlight stuff in here, you can move the lighting adjustment around. I'll smooth that a little bit. Everything's fine. Temperature. This is actually a big one. I'll put some black point in it too. Going to the left will make it more blue. Cold colored. To the right, it's warmer. You know, that's where you'll get the purple skies too. It pretty much hit it on there. I like it a little bit bluer, so I'll just go a little bit under. And then you can hit your saturations, your highlights. The easy way to tell is just go down. You know, whatever comes out is what it's doing. So this is hardly even finding highlights. I'll put about up there then. So most of it's in shadows. You know what? It's not that. It's for some reason on the second monitor, it doesn't always work right. See how it changed right there? Alright, yeah, so now you can kind of see, like, you can see all the colors that are gone now, but when I move it up, the colors that come back. Same with saturation. So those are the colors that these are affecting. I turned up a little bit. Probably just save it, just like right there. And that is about all there really is to it. And then it should pop up right here. And just for giggles, we'll do HDR Pro. Let that go. Let's see. Now what I do on these is I actually export these out of the regular folder and I put them in a different catalog. And then if I just want to work on them straight, I will export them to the desktop as a JPEG. I'll give them a number and I'll mark them as exported. This one's almost there. Okay. Got some funkiness. I'll leave it at default settings, so I won't keep it anyway. But for whatever reason, these always look really good on here, but they just never look as good when they're actually finished. But HDR Effects is not owned by Google. If it was Nick Effects, it comes with the whole suite, and it was like $800. Now it's like $150 for everything. Black and white, noise reduction, color effects, and that's like my go-to one. It's definitely worth it. First thing I'd pick up. Photomatic's the one I really like for HDR is about $100 on its own, but it's worth it. So, you know, it's balanced. You know, it has a different look to it for sure on HDR Effects. It is fully controllable over here too, but it's a little more confusing for people to learn it. I mean, I have one that's just kind of a basic merge that I use, but you can kind of see just some of the different looks. on how it makes it look different than the other one. That one right there is like mine that I use for just like a basic one to shoot out to Photoshop. I have as a preset, but so that's the other way to do it through a different company, but they're definitely different looks. Actually, I'll just save it. And then I didn't really do anything over here this time, but just so we can compare them side by side. So this one was Photomatics, the one I was going to use, and this one is HDR effects. So see, I mean, it looks different than it did on the other one and that one. So, I mean, I think that one just looks better than that one. And again, it goes back to Photomatics being that one. So from there, I'll either export it out, like I said, or put it in Network Catalog, or I can just go in here and go into edit in Photoshop. And this has gone on way too long, so I'm not going to do that on this one. But hope that kind of clears up what is HDR and what isn't. So actually, let's go back into this real quick. So remember, this was our original one. You go into the trees and stuff, and there wasn't, even after we edited it out, there's not a, you still can't see a lot of that stuff. But the HDR version, you can see all that detail and stuff in there, and that's where you get the HDR. It has nothing to do with a bunch of grain and making it grungy looking. It's what it's made to do is pull details out of the shadows, pull details out of the highlights. That's what HDR is, not the stuff that they try and sell you on these little apps. Anyway, bye.